In this session, we're going to be looking at factored circumstances and issues that make electoral violence a permanent feature of our democratic process. But before we go into this, we must define what we mean by electoral violence. What is electoral violence itself? According to Ibuzo, electoral violence is any act of violence perpetuated in the course of political activities, including pre-election, during, and post-election periods. It may include any of the following acts: thuggery, use of violence to disrupt political meetings or voting at polling stations, or use of dangerous weapons to intimidate voters and other electoral process, or to cause bodily harm or injury to any person connected with the electoral process. The International Foundation for Election System defines electoral violence as any violence or threat of violence that is aimed at any person or property involved in the election process or at disrupting any part of the electoral process during election. So if you look at the definition, electoral violence occurs in three phases: pre, during, and post-election. So the drivers of electoral violence are many, but for ease of identification, we would aggregate them into 5 clusters. The first cluster we're going to look at is political interest. How does political interest drive electoral violence? The second is the role of non-state armed actors, non-state armed groups, that we've seen the rise of them since 1999. Then the third we're going to look at is economic interest. How does economic interest drive electoral violence in Nigeria? Also, we're going to look at the role of social media, the new media. How does it drive electoral violence? And lastly, we're going to look at how religious and ethnic interest drive electoral violence in Nigeria. We are going to now go ahead to discuss the 5 main clusters that influence electoral violence. The first one, like I mentioned, is political interest. So we're going to look at how do political parties, their followers, political arrangements, this itself drive electoral violence. Political parties, politicians, political actors in Nigeria are not in the process, are not in the game to lose fairly. So every contestant wants to win by however means possible. So they recruit party agents, they go to court. When they lose in court, they make excuses. All of this drive electoral violence. So secondly, we're going to look at the role of non-state actors, armed groups, armed interests, groups that could disrupt electoral outcome. So we have the unions, the transport unions, and all of these groups. They are drivers of electoral violence. They come around and influence how violence is used for electoral outcome. Also, we have economic interest. Poverty itself is a driver of electoral violence in Nigeria. People are poor, people are unemployed, people are marginalized. A lot of these marginalized communities are hubs of electoral violence, and some of the people involved are from these backgrounds. So it's been said that a lot of political thugs are from poor background, they are unemployed. So this influences violence in elections. Also, we have to accept the role of the new media, fake news, social media. How do this drive electoral outcomes? How does this drive political violence? And lastly, we'll look at religious and ethnic interest. One of the things that election does in Nigeria is it worsens existing conflicts. Religious, ethnic, social. Election time, things become worse. And the reason is because political actors use these differences to drive political advantage. Ethnicity, we are from the same tribe. We are from the same town. It's our turn to rule. It's our turn to govern. Religious interest, Muslim tickets, Christian tickets, animist Christian tickets. A lot of these factors are drivers of electoral violence. What this means as a whole, as a collective, is that these groups, these activities, these factors are the reasons why we are going to have violence in our elections. Poor neighborhoods are going to have higher incidence of electoral violence because economic interest is going to affect them. Communities that are sharply divided along ethnic and religious lines are going to have increased incidences of electoral violence. And the driver here is going to be the ethnic and religious differences they have, the Muslim divide, the Hausa Fulani divide, Hausa Igbo divide, Igbo Yoruba divide. A lot of these divides are going to drive electoral violence in Nigeria.